Welcome back, movie lovers. This is Michael Clayton. I am welcoming you back to Seduced by Cinema so we can go ahead and discuss another new film out in the theaters. Today we are going to be talking about the remake of The Invisible Man. It, of course, is a remake of the 1933 James Whale classic adapted by an H.G. Wells novel. It originally starred Claude Rains as the title character, and actually Gloria Stewart, who you may know as the elderly woman in Titanic, had a role in there as the young woman in the movie. So that's worth checking out. And if you haven't seen the original 1933 movie, definitely do give it a look, because it is a fantastic film in its own right, and definitely does have a charm to it that holds to this day. As for the most recent incarnation of The Invisible Man, this one is directed by Leigh Whannell, and I have to say, I love this movie. Now, I am a horror movie fan, so that might not come as a shock, but I have to tell you, the original Invisible Man is one of my favorite Universal monster creations. What I liked about it is outside of like Frankenstein or even Dracula or like the Wolfman, all of these characters tended to have a tragic quality to them and tried to help you like empathize with the character. Invisible Man was always a lot of fun because he was just a straight out villain. He was probably the most sinister of the Universal monster characters, and so it did make him kind of a fun diversion from these kind of tragic stories that surrounded a lot of the other Universal monster lore. My problem is every time they would try to remake this movie, they always fell flat. I felt like Hollow Man was not that good. Memoirs of an Invisible Man, the less said about that, the better. They just really couldn't capture the quality of the film in a unique way. And I felt this film took a different approach that really made it work better. Now you might be asking, what is that approach? Two things. Number one, they built a really interesting story around it that updated the material. In this film, it is a scientist that is the Invisible Man, but the story is he has a wife who is a victim of domestic abuse, clearly in the movie. She runs away from him, and then he fakes his death to try to torture her, basically throughout the film. He is basically trying to convince everybody that she's insane because they all assume that he is in fact deceased. And she keeps claiming to see things move and see things react to this invisible element. And everybody kind of assumes that she's losing her mind. This whole gaslighting element of the movie added something that even the original didn't really touch on. And in doing so, pointed out my biggest issue with all of the Invisible Man remakes prior to this one. The Invisible Man remakes in the past always focused on the Invisible Man. Now you might be looking at this and thinking, well, of course they focus on the Invisible Man. He's the title character. The problem with that is when you have a character who you do not see for the entire film or for the majority of the film, there does become an element where it's harder to kind of connect to that character. It's harder to really empathize with that character, especially when you're the one that has to follow them on their journey. Now, what this movie does well is it decides instead to follow along the lead character that's being antagonized. What makes this great is in all the previous incarnations, the antagonized individuals always were kind of throwaway characters. They were never really that developed. They were kind of just put there to be put upon. And this time, the main focus of it is the lead in the movie, Elizabeth Moss. And if I have to tell you, the one thing I have to say that completely blows every other element out of the water in this movie is Elizabeth Moss. She is a force of nature in this movie. The majority of the film is her reacting to invisible things. A lot of practical effects from things being flung at her. A lot of weird moments where she's kind of being dragged across the ground, but you see nobody there. A lot of the scares are having to kind of be developed by her response. In the hands of an actor who's not as capable, this would come across as really campy. This would come across as not very believable and laughable in most senses. But this movie really does amp up the tension, and I have to say, while the direction is great, a huge part of that is her performance. You genuinely buy she is terrified of this man. You genuinely buy she has been through some harrowing shit. You really do believe she feels like she's going insane, and because she's being so horribly gaslit, yet has no way to produce any evidence of what is occurring to her because the individual is in fact invisible. Elizabeth Moss has always been a great actress. In Mad Men, she was great. She's been great in all of her film work since then. She's been great in this genre. In Us, she had a small role, and she was fantastic in that. But I have to say, the majority of this film is hinged on her performance, as she is by far the lead character, and she carries the entire movie brilliantly. Now, that's not to take anything away from the other actors in this film. There's a gentleman that she's actually living with after she leaves her husband, a black gentleman who's great. His daughter is fantastic in the movie, in the small scenes that she has, but so many of the scenes are really predicated on her response and how she's handling it that you cannot divorce Elizabeth Moss from this material too far without realizing the contribution she's made to this film. Now, I also got to give credit to Leigh Whannell, the director. He also was involved with the writing of this movie. He's known for creating things such as Saw and for working on Insidious, so he definitely does have a great horror pedigree. He continues that here with some expert direction for the horror genre. I gotta tell you, the opening sequence of this movie has nothing supernatural, nothing creepy-crawly of like a unconventional sense. It's literally just a woman kind of in peril in a very realistic situation that anybody could face, and it is terrifying. They are able to use the lack of sound and sound in different scenes to really create an evocative mood. They create this tension that is palpable. And even when the invisibility qualities come in, they continue to have that tension built up in a very strong way. I was really impressed by how well they were able to create so much with what was clearly a small budget and very practical effects for the majority of the film. Now, the effects are one criticism I do have for this movie. Most of the effects are practical, as I've said, or at least appear to be very practical. Some of them might have used some CG trickery that was blended together very well. Where it does take a little bit of a hit is that when you do learn how the gentleman in the movie is able to be invisible, you do realize that some of the effects in those scenes when they're kind of flickering back and forth between visibility and invisibility are a little off. I won't explain how he turns invisible in this film because that is kind of a key, but I will say when you do learn that secret and when they start to use some of the CGI effects for that, they do look a little underdeveloped. Not enough to pull you out of the movie because they built up enough confidence in the viewer to kind of make you buy into it regardless, but the CGI is noticeably a little sophomoric compared to what you've seen in other projects. Now, I have to say, one of the things I have to give a lot of credit for is this film has a couple of moments that could easily come off as cheesy, but they build enough of a tone that you buy into them. I've always said, with good acting, good writing, and good direction, you can make the audience buy into just about anything. I mean, heck, E.T. made you fall in love with a little alien that had a very bizarre shape, and if any other direction or acting was applied to that, you would probably be laughing out of the theater, but it had a real sensitive core to it. This movie's no different in regards to the fear in it. So many of the elements as the movie progresses get a little sillier, but you keep buying into the character, in particular Elizabeth Moss's character, and really do buy into the events of the film. I won't give it away, but there's a twist about halfway through the movie that feels like it could be very soap opera-ish, or it could be very grindhouse type of turn to the story if done improperly. But in the context of this film and her performance, you totally buy into it. There's some slight pacing issues here and there, but not really. For the most part, the film begins with a bang and then continues through there and has a very good current and does a great job of building tension at just the right pace. Now, I gotta say, overall, I gotta give this movie a 9 out of 10. This is one of the stronger movies that have come out this year. I was a little worried that Blumhouse began the year with Fantasy Island. I did not like that, but Invisible Man brought Blumhouse back roaring with a bang. They got The Hunt coming out in about a week. I'm looking forward to that as well. They really did show they are still one of the kings of horror cinema here. I gotta tell you, if you have not seen The Invisible Man, you have to go see it. And I do have to warn some of our sensitive viewers, this is one of the more accurate portrayals of PTSD as a result of abuse I've ever seen committed to film. It's spectacular, but for people who have encountered this, I do want to give you a heads up. It does deal with some sensitive topics on that. It does deal with a very harrowing portrayal of such things, and it does give a little bit of a believable performance for somebody who suffered with that. So if you are sensitive to that topic, do be warned before you go into theater, but I guarantee you if you give the movie a chance, you are going to see an excellent film. I want to thank you guys once again for coming to Seduced by Cinema, and I will see you next time.